this is what happened consecutively. I finally got my architecture license. I got promoted, I got married, I got laid off, I got pregnant. In the 6th month, I started Latent Design as Plan B. That's all of the compounding factors that came into starting the firm, and I really started as Plan B of this is a profession that in 2010 is not doing so hot across the board. It also realistically is a profession that isn't going to hire a pregnant woman, and so I had to figure out a way to make everything work for me and my family at that point. So with those lean startup principles, this is what I did with that $10,000, right? I had the bare necessities of starting a practice. So you have your incorporation fees, your licensing fees, your insurance. The blue in the middle is the biggest chunk for AutoCAD, so big shout out to Autodesk every single day. And then you have your everything else that you need, and that left just $1,500 to make architecture. Yeah, go make architecture for a year. By the end of the day, I realized that leaning in may also cause you to fall flat on your face. Well, this is my business plan. This was literally the first business plan because I never thought Latent Design would go past the year of being pregnant and having my quote-unquote, making my own maternity leave, and then I would just go work for another firm. So there's my business plan to make me through the year. Post-it notes, of course. So on the left was make the thing that makes the things, and on the right it was don't go broke. So I was done by the end of the day. I already screwed that up. I had to write oops through that, and it kind of started to change my idea of how do we go for broke. I'm already broke. Let's like really, figuratively go for broke because I'm literally broke. And how can, with the right mix of being bold and naive, allow risk and failure to be part of the process rather than options to be avoided. Well, the other thing that was combining at the same time is I had 1 month before I knew I was completely screwed, where I was laid off, and I don't have a graduate degree. I have a bachelor's of architecture degree, which is the equivalent of the architectural GED. I don't have a master's. So for about 1 month, I thought about going back to grad school, and the schools that I was looking at were schools that do have a strong social impact practice and design build program, Rural Studio, Virginia Tech, WashU. So those were the schools that I was looking at. And when I found out that that wasn't happening, I was going to stay put in Chicago, I really had to find options of where could I replicate that type of learning experience in Chicago for free. And that's where I started to volunteer with Architecture for Humanity. And this allowed this safe collaborative space to build a design community that was interested in building sustainable communities. I didn't even know this existed in Chicago, so it brought this huge awareness of what was going on in my own neighborhood. This is also where I saw a community where I saw more women, more minorities, more people like me than I did at any of my previous places of work within just a pure architecture firm. And this needs to continue to be nurtured, and we need to challenge all preconceptions about gender equity in the built environment, not only from the design disciplines, but also then what does it mean to have a built environment that does promote gender equity. However, the volunteer non-for-profit model to engage and generate beautiful one-off design solutions is an amazing opportunity to be introduced to the field, but it has a huge gap because it isn't a sustainable model to move the profession forward because you're learning how to manipulate aesthetics and budgets on small-scale projects, but it's not a systemic approach, and people are transient when they're volunteers, right? Everything goes up and down, you go back to work, you move, and you also tend to be very young and idealistic, which is really fascinating and a lovely place to be. We first tested this idea with how do we create, how do we tackle the vacancies that we have in Chicago, and we have about 10,000 vacant lots. This is a story that resonates across many communities, not only in the US, but globally are dealing with issues of vacancy in space. And we were approached by a client that had these 2 concrete vacant lots in a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood in Chicago, and they asked us, like, design something, design a bench, design something for it. They just wanted the object. And we looked at that as, the flexibility of working and volunteering. We had no liability, like literally, because we're a not-for-profit. So we were able to think a little bit more broadly and say, well, what if we designed this a system that would allow for multiple ideas to come forward rather than just a small design team. So we created the Activate Public Space Design Competition, and it was created 4 years ago to transform vacant space in Chicago with a 1-year temporary installation. That was a design competition brief. So you had to design a temporary installation that would last 1 year in Chicago, all 4 seasons. Sometimes all 4 of those seasons are in 1 day. And it had to be done for $1,000 because that was literally the budget that the non-for-profit had. So we wanted to look at the micro of the micro at that point. Our Activate, this is the winning installation. It was a team out of Barcelona, so we really saw how far this resonated across the globe. They took this wonderful idea of creating these modular planter spaces of just plants, plywood, and paint. Put it in on 1 day. And what was interesting about this is what you see here, the 2 people in the foreground, those are the only 2 actual volunteers for the install day. Everyone else came. That's like analog social media happening right there. That's, you know, somebody would get off the bus, be walking home, see something bright and red, go get a friend, bring them back. Everyone would start talking about this. And it was an amazing experience to be around, to see community building in a very literal sense. And that could only happen because there was the support of that surrounding community, and then there were these opportunities for everyone to be involved, from multi-generational aspects of volunteering. So you could have a child could paint as well as an adult could paint the side. So we weren't excluding anyone based on skill, and we weren't excluding anyone based on access, and then we were also working in multiple languages at the same time. So we had to be very cognizant of who our audience was to work on a project like this. And in less than 6 months, the community raised over $100,000. So that's a $1,000 competition. The community raised $100,000. What it did is it galvanized the neighborhood together around a common idea, and it had a common shared space. So it was $100,000 in the legal right to transform the 2 vacant lots into public parkland. That is no small feat, to take something from concrete to a public space, and then to do it in 6 months just shows the absolute tenacity and demand that was already latent in that neighborhood. For us to start to see and understand that scale was absolutely impressive. And then for the compensation back to the design team that worked on it, this project was featured in the Venice Biennale, the Spontaneous Interventions exhibit, both in Venice, and then because it was a Chicago-based project, it was integral of bringing spontaneous interventions to Chicago, and that started the thread of now why we have a Chicago Architectural Biennale next year, which is freaking everyone out because it's next year, and we just got a theme. But all of those, it's that small-scale acupuncture-style project creates these networks that can feed back into the design community while impacting your community at large as well. And I don't think that they need to be separate. Because we feel the future of design in our profession is not only the design of buildings and places, but also of systems, at Latent we think if it impacts the built environment, we have to be there. And that has shaped our involvement to not only to architecture, but policy and also education. Most of our projects are inextricably linked to the politics of race, space, equity, and justice, and that's because half of our client base are nonprofits and community organizations, and the other half now, as we're growing into getting larger private commissions and larger public projects, it's people who are almost directly linked to that type of social mission as well. And our firm is really, we're beyond activist at this point. I mean, yes, we claim we are an activist firm. We're not, we have a very strong opinion about design and the built environment and what's going on in our city. And we're not afraid to place that out there because we're not afraid that we're going to lose clients or offend anyone because we're offending everybody. So that's how we kind of go about it. Now, my firm is finalizing a contract with the City of Chicago to do this all across Chicago in partnership with the Department of Transportation, where we will be working on over 500,000 square feet of property in the city, and we are working at the systemic level to see what issues are stifling this, from zoning to revenue to transportation regulations to our municipal marketing ordinances that we have in place to lots of lawyers, But that's where we have to ultimately go to get to that system, because we could work in the individual neighborhoods and the individual lots, but the biggest landowner is the city, and we took the risk to go after and approach the city and develop a partnership with them to do this. And then we'll start a 3-year contract starting next year that will bring a variety of different public space typologies to the neighborhoods, but then also bring back and promote small business and local economic development as well. We've taken that further to submit 2 parallel proposals to the clients, the want one that they asked us for, the need one that we actually think that they should have. And since our profession operates on this perpetual soft sell, we're a little bit more aggressive on that, and we feel comfortable doing that because the worst that they're going to say is no, and we're still going to get a building out of it. So we can still do architecture, but can we design the architectural system around that that makes that building an integral part of the organization and then also of the neighborhood. This is an example of one client. We are building them a new construction community center, and we are not only designing the building, but then we also designed an academic curriculum, a STEM-based design build boot camp to create a program that would add value at the micro level of a vacant lot. So we were continuing on the thread of vacancies in Chicago, but then also on the macro level of the community, as well as support their organizational programming. They're a nonprofit that specifically works with young women, 12 through 18, predominantly African American on the far south side of Chicago. If you're familiar with Chicago, you know our red line goes very far south, and there's at least 40 more blocks of Chicago beyond that. Had a very different conversation about programming if we were just dealing with the executive team versus when we're dealing with everyone who's inhabiting the building and having an accurate cross-representation of that. And when we were going through that, we got to this discussion of science labs. And the client thought science labs were Bunsen burners and lab coats and goggles, and that was science to them. And I don't know if anyone else shares this feeling with me, but I feel the conversation of STEM and STEAM has actually neglected architecture and contracting and, to the sense, architectural engineering and structural engineering in some ways from that conversation. I don't know how we got pulled out, but I don't feel that we're part of that conversation. It's a little bit infuriating to me. And because of that, we created the 2-week design build boot camp for them to allow the young women of the program organization, of the organization to be able to start with building. And so they went in, and day one they never touched a tool, never touched anything, and they learned not only design thinking principles, they learned your basic geometry and understanding of space and place. They learned architectural principles. They were able to work and bring not only contractors down to the site, but some of our consultant teams who went down and gave essentially lunch and learns to high schoolers. And then they not only transformed the vacant lot that you saw in the previous picture, but this is working within the Chicago public school system, and then they transformed a space within one of the public schools that are in the neighborhood to be a new community space. And so what they did is in this space, they look like most terrible, it's a beautiful 100-year-old building, but this space they pulled up the dingy carpet, they decided, this is what the students decided to do. They learned every piece of the design process, so they decided, and with their own gumption, decided to pull up the floor and sand it. Went to Home Depot themselves and rented a sander, and when we come in, they're like, hey, we're sanding the floor now. We're like, okay, we're doing that now. We eventually had to get a professional because, as you would think, someone with no experience sanding a floor turned out hilarious. And then they created this entire, instead of a blackboard, they said, we want a green screen. We want to be able to project whatever we want. That's a really profound concept from someone who has no technical or design experience. So they say instead of a blackboard, we want a green screen. We want to be able to project whatever we want. We want to have these individual spaces, and we want to have platforms for performances. And they understood everything that went on into that room. That room's designed to be an academic, it's an office for the academic director, but 22 other school organizations actually use that room. So there is the official use and then the unofficial use, and it's this intersection between the formal and informal programming that I think they acknowledge incredibly well, and watching that happen starts to bring that even more deeply into this relationship between design and economy. And when I first started Latent Design and going to social impact conferences, the public interest design conferences, this image has been burned onto my retinas. And while the road to social change is paved with good intentions and good ideas, many projects never reach the final destination, and that's true also within the broader field of architecture planning as well. So why is this? For an idea to sustain itself, it needs to be more than a good idea. We need to start to look at how we could invert access as well, and we need to make this a sustainable business model to be viable. So when I look at that, and I look back, when I talk about access inverted, I go even further back to school and think about, more than one senior professor who implored us to look at not only a variety of types of philosophers, but also Maslow. Because that was the basis of our existence, right? We provide the basic needs of humanity, that physiological needs. And what I find interesting is I can be blinded by the enlightenment in this room. So we are a room of enlightened individuals. We're all totally zen, right? But most of us aren't getting any sleep. Some of us are broke, and we are not meeting our basic physiological needs of this elusive work-life balance. So how do we take that and look very deeply within ourselves to think about how do we invert Maslow and access? There's two things that need to be happening, and I think in order to increase access, we have to shift the way that our business model works as well. Rita mentioned this before, that according to the AIA, only 9% of firms surveyed are 20 employees or more. So the architecture profession is small firms, and sometimes in the public perception it doesn't seem that way. With the majority of firms are firms like mine, 37% of them are between 2 and 4 employees. Emphasis on professional social impact programs skew towards the larger corporate social responsibility in larger firms, and which do not adequately address the same critical issues of project structure and firm risk that are present in small firms. And I feel that's at the core of what the practice management group is also looking at and trying to get at, is how do we increase risk, increase opportunity in the smaller firms, and how do we allow ourselves to think small within our industry and provide the right programming, because even in our own industry, I think we're not adequately addressing social issues, but in our own industry, we're not even addressing who the practitioners are most of the time. This is a strategy that I think everyone should employ at some date. It's the most depressing thing to do, is to map every single project you won or lost in your firm history, and that's what this is. So this is a little bit over half of the projects to date in the firm. I haven't brought in any of 2014 at all of this. We mapped out everything. So I hope you can see all the colors. The pro bono projects are the ones in red. The projects that we received are the ones in blue, and the ones that we had a proposal out but didn't receive are the ones in purple. And then the size of the dot itself ranges in scale from the smallest ones are about 10K to about $1 million, and then the largest outlier ones are where we had projects, 2 outlier projects of 26 million and 75 million, where we were brought in as a project team. So think about that. That was the first validation of the work and the process that, and the point of view that Latent Design had was valid, was when we were invited to be part of a project team for a $75 million project in Chicago. That's ridiculous, and so it doesn't make any sense in some ways. But there was a firm who saw the value of what we were doing and saw some of those small works and wanted to bring us on because they saw that there's an opportunity to fit and expand their programming as well. This as well, by understanding what we were networked with, helped us understand the return on investment for not only our pro bono projects, because we still do have a pro bono mission within the firm, but it also saw the nature of our work, and it also allowed us to know, to check back and see where we were losing projects to. And what was interesting is when we checked back to see where we were losing projects to, we lost projects to contractors. You probably heard this at one point in time, a contractor will go to a client and be like, yeah, I have someone who can try that. Where we get marginalized because we're working on smaller scale projects, Or we were losing it to very large firms that had that corporate social responsibility mission who could go to the client who might be providing a small fee for the project that's perfect for us, a firm of 2, 3, 4 people, with very little overhead, we can make that work. But they would say, we'll do it pro bono and you can have the power of our 100-person team working on it. Clients are dumb, they're going to take more for free than less for money. And so we found ourselves positioned in a very unique position to say, okay, if we're going to play against these large firms, we have to have a different strategy. And if we're going to continue to lose to contractors, we also have to have a different strategy there. So we found ourselves working within a very unique gap. And the one project that brought the $26 million project, proposed $26 million and the $75 million project was this one. Fresh Moves Mobile Market. This was an outlier for us. It was back in 2010 that we worked on this project that brought the other outliers. So I don't really know if outliers bring other outliers, but it's an interesting thought that I will continue to study. Fresh Moves, if you're not familiar with it, is a one-aisle mobile market in a decommissioned transit bus that provides fresh produce to food deserts across Chicago. This is a project where we actively pursued scope creep. This is not a building, so if you're not looking at a building and you're starting with a building, it's still a space, it's still a project, it's still a system. How do we go beyond all of that? So we designed the whole entire piece because when the organization approached us, they had the great idea of a mobile market inside a disused piece of transit infrastructure. They had the idea for this unique public-private partnership. But they didn't have a business card, they didn't have a name, they didn't have a website, they didn't even have a freaking bus. So we worked with them on every aspect of this project, from the initial branding, the website, the initial pitch deck to go back to the city, went to meetings with them, with the CTA. We really steward the project with them, and now it has not only been successful in Chicago, expanded to 3 buses, but has been replicated in over 7 cities. So we have one in Boston, we have in Chattanooga, New Orleans is looking at one, LA is supposed to start one, 2 cities in Canada that I'm forgetting right now. And that's resonance, that's huge resonance. And it's resonance outside the community and outside the community of architecture and the field of architecture. And what I've been pushing for is how do we have resonance within the field of architecture. The same year that this launched, our AIA Chicago chapter held the first small practitioners, small project awards. And they had 2 categories. They had small objects, meaning an object $50,000 or less to be created, and then small projects were $500,000 and less. This bus took $30,000 to complete. I was like, we're entering into small object, we're totally going to win, no one's going to show up with a bus. We have to win. We lost to a chandelier. And that started the drive to make resonance within the community, because I like the firm that did the chandelier. They're actually very good friends now, but I couldn't understand where that went. We did get one up and validation a year later when we were the first. We won an Architizer A+ award, and so we were the inaugural year of that award in the A+ farming category. So in that one was interesting because we were dead last in the public vote, won the jury vote, and again we were the only project in that category that wasn't a building. And that's what blew the jury away. It's thinking beyond the building that is such a hard shift for us sometimes. With all that information there, all the mapping, all the projects, all the scope creep in there, it may seem counterintuitive to expand our services beyond just architecture, but that's where we're at right now. We have 3 main areas of work. We call it define the context, design the content, deploy the commission. In the define, you see many of the things that we are familiar with: programming, vision development, organizational strategy. That's a little bit outside our scope. User research and analysis, we do that anyway as part of programming, but we push that even further in partnerships with anthropologists or social services organizations, community workshops, urban planning. That also fits at the big tiers. That's what we're trained to do. I have a license to actually do that. But then we also are coming into deploying the commission, and that's this really gray area of placemaking. That's where much of our small-scale work falls under. But now we're also moving our firm into a series of services where we're going to we have our GC license and we're moving into architect-led design build services. And the reason we're doing that is because we saw that gap early on of who we were losing projects to, but then since many of our projects are small budget, $250,000 or less, I can't get the contractors who work on the larger ones to get out of bed for those. And I can't also find the right contractors who bring the level of craft that we want to have. We found ourselves moving into a role of being of construction administration, essentially going into an owner's rep role to be able to maintain that quality and craft on a project, but we weren't getting the fees for it. And so if you've taken this much risk so far in the 4 years, the little bit extra risk of being a contractor for projects that we already feel like we're helping the client helping the client pick the contractor and get the subs, it doesn't feel like a big risk to us. It actually feels like we're consolidating our point of view and our visual style and actually offering a better value and being more competitive in that particular market. We're not going to go higher for larger projects. I'm not going to do a $22 million school. I don't want to take that risk at all, but I feel that the types of projects we like working on and we see the most of, we want to be able to take greater control of that. And this is how it all fits together. So if we take those same 3 program areas of define, design, deploy, we look at that previous community center project that I presented along with not only the vacant lot renovation, but also the school renovation. That's roughly, I'll say 100% accurate diagram of how it all worked, right? Where we started at the front end with defining the context, but the programming led to something else. The programming led to the macro view beyond the building of looking at space and place and developing a new organizational strategy. And then now it's slowly wrapping back around to getting into the designing the content of the actual building itself. So it's a very circuitous route. It's definitely non-linear, but this is where we start to say we come out and we design the system for you. We design the system of the building and the system of how your building will impact the community. When we talk about pro bono and how we continue to incorporate that into our work, we know we believe in paying our employees. You know, that's another issue of internship and kind of this residual of this apprenticeship model that our industry has. So we know we have to pay our employees, but sometimes we know we have to take on projects that our clients can't pay us. And so we have this pro bono mission within our firm. And how does that work is early on, we created a separate bank account for the firm. Within that bank account is where we take, and the first 3 years was 10% of our project profits we put into that particular bank account. And that was what essentially subsidized our pro bono work. With this, we can easily see how much money we have. We know that's related to the amount of time that it takes to pay our employees, so we're essentially paying them the same rate, but charging ourselves, billing ourselves at cost, and charging the clients nothing at that point. And then we could, because there's a monetary amount with it, I could say, for example, to a client, I go, well, I only have $10,000 in funds to be able to take on your pro bono project to pay for my employees. Let's really define the scope. Let's see how you can bring something equitable into this in a different way. Instead of a financial responsibility, can we have intellectual capital in a different way? Can we have human capital in a different way? And that creates this unique relationship. We also don't take pro bono projects on by ourselves at all anymore, so we won't do an architecture-led pro bono project. We work with, because our network has expanded so much more, we work with larger pro bono initiatives such as Taproot Foundation or local Chicago organizations like the Community Trust. We work, every year we do a grant with a marketing and design organization that provides services to one not-for-profit to do a complete makeover from organizational strategy, graphic design, and then we provide the spatial design as part of that. And we found within those larger teams, not only are we learning better business practices, we're expanding our reach and we're having much greater impact than if we went with design to couple the two of them anymore. I can't go home and say, I'm Katherine right now and I have a family and I happen to live in Chicago and from 9 to whatever, I'm an architect. They're inextricably linked, they're the same thing, and it's being a citizen in and a designer of that drives our practice to be the type it is. And verbs, they're called practice, and I truly believe in that definition. It's something that you do to get good. It's not something that you do once you're good. And so that's what I would like to leave you on, to say, let's figure out ways and bring more practice elements into the profession of architecture, rather than waiting for us to all get good at being architects. Because I think it's the practice that makes us better architects. Thank you.